Science is a way of querying nature.
Right now, wars are being fought over oil. In a short matter of time, they will be fought over water.
An upheaval, a massive change is required.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the very first show of the Georgia Enviro Show. I am your Enviro host, Colin Poe. The Georgia Enviro Show is a six-part series live streaming to you, which aims to start the conversation and highlight environmental issues in Georgia. The Georgia Enviro Show was conceived and produced by the Dogwood Alliance, which works to mobilize diverse voices to protect the southern forests and communities from destructive industrial logging. As a network of activists, partnered organizations, thought leaders, and neighbors, we seek social, environmental, and racial justice. By joining forces and engaging in the fight to develop solutions together, we aim to solve the crises faced by our communities, our states, and our planet. To kick off this conversation, we will begin highlighting some of Georgia's most critical environmental stories. Here's a shocker. Georgia Power has testified that Plant Vogtle is the only commercial nuclear power plant undergoing expansion in the US, highly unlikely to be finished anytime soon. If memory serves, Georgia ratepayers were promised 2 new reactors generating cheaper energy by 2016 and 2017. With those deadlines long past, the project is now billions of dollars over budget and completion is nowhere in sight. What does that mean for us though? The Georgia ratepayers? Who's going to be subsidizing this expansion? Well, overall, it's unclear. What does seem clear is that power bills in Georgia are not going to go down anytime soon. But on a brighter note, Emory University is hopping on the Solar Express, if you will. The Emory Druid Hills campus is taking the lead on reducing greenhouse gases emissions with their plan to install over 15,000 solar panels throughout their North Decatur campus. Emory's aim is to reduce greenhouse emissions by 45% in the next 10 years and to ultimately achieve net zero emissions by 2050. With this capable of generating nearly 5 megawatts of power, Emory is poised to reach the zenith of sustainable universities in the South. Also on the renewable energy front, Facebook is looking to reduce its energy footprint in Georgia. Construction has begun on a 20 megawatt solar farm in Colquitt County, which is a rural community in Southwest Georgia. The Odom Solar Farm is part of a portfolio of projects to provide power to Walton Electric Membership Corporation, or if you're wondering, an EMC, as part of a utilities agreement to supply 100% renewable energy for Facebook's data center in Newton County, Georgia. In total, the project will provide 435 megawatts of new renewable energy to support Facebook's goal of 100% renewable energy to run their data center operations in the state. Moving over, attention all hikers, campers, anglers, birders, outdoor businesses, wildlife watchers, and recreation clubs. This one's for you. As you may have heard, the Trump administration has been working to roll back the ability of citizens to comment that is currently part of a key environmental management law, the National Environmental Policy Act, which is affectionately known as NEPA. According to Jess Riddle, executive director of Georgia Forest Watch, public comments under NEPA have protected vistas, streams, and rare species, improved management, and saved taxpayers money. The proposed revision would decrease government accountability and remove protections for our national forests and other public lands. Despite a 2015 National Academy of Sciences report that noted that the Southern Appalachians should be the highest priority in the nation for the area's globally significant biodiversity, yet it's at the risk of climate change, exotic invasive species, and resource extraction. The good news, over 80,000 people have submitted their opposition to these changes. That's definitely a win. On the big biomass front, looks like big biomass is up to good as usual. Oh, no good, rather. Envivo is the world's largest producer of wood pellets, itty bitty bits of tree in the world. These pellets, also called biomass, are shipped across the ocean to the EU to be burned as, wait for it, clean energy. Yeah, let that roll around in your stage 2 compost tumbler for a minute. To make matters worse, Envivo plans to expand their clear-cutting wood pellet production throughout the Southeast to the tune of 3 new processing facilities in Georgia, which will amount to millions of tons per year of pellets, remember those little bits of tree, and tens of thousands of acres of clear-cut forests. To that end, Envivo has agreed to purchase the biomass plant in Waycross, Georgia, which has been operating since 2011 and has a production capacity of 800,000 tons of trees per year. Calling biomass clean, sustainable, and renewable does not make it so. To those of you out there in the legislature, the investment community, our public service commissions, please do your homework and refuse to be hoodwinked by this dirty, expensive industry with no scruples. Say no to biomass. Let's work together to stop this unchecked expansion. You guys ready for this? It's going to blow your minds. Georgia voters have climate change on the brain. New Climate Nexus polling data shows that right now, 64% of Georgia voters support government action to address climate change. And 7 in 10 believe that the state, the federal government, and their representatives should be doing more to address climate change. In general, Georgia voters are likely to back candidates for public office who support specific climate policies. And 7 in 10 would vote for candidates who support increasing government funding for renewable energy or setting stronger fuel efficiency standards, for example. Georgia voters agree that the state should move away from fossil fuels, that domestic development of these renewables is good for job creation in the state. And nearly 2/3 of Georgia voters think that developing the renewable energy sources like wind and solar should be at the top priority for addressing Georgia's energy needs. Sit with that for a moment. Wrapping up our new segment of the Georgia Enviro Show, we have the pleasure of ending on a very, very high note. On June 25th, following a unanimous vote from both the Georgia House and Senate, 163 yeas to 0 nays and 48 yeas to 0 nays, respectively, House Bill 857, which would ban the use of wood products treated with creosote compounds, and this one I'm going to butcher for sure, nephetate compounds for purposes of commercial electricity generation, has passed the House and the Senate and will now move to our favorite governor, Governor Kemp's desk. These unpronounceable compounds, as I'm definitely going to refer to them as moving forward, are commonly used to treat products such as railroad ties, marine pylons, telephone poles, you name it, they're burning it. They are toxic, very toxic, and they are currently being released, after being burned, of course, released into Georgia's air at 2 biomass plants, which generate electricity in this way. Banning the burning of wood made from this type of chemically treated products may be a no-brainer for some, but it's also a major legislative win for air quality in the frontline communities with no choice but to breathe this air. Yes. Riding this green wave of inspiration, next we'll be hearing from Savannah Morning News' own environment reporter, Mary Landers, about the rewards and challenges of environmental reporting. Let's see what she has to say.
Hi folks, my name is Mary Landers. I'm the environment reporter at the Savannah Morning News. I've been there at the Savannah Morning News for about 23 years, most of them as environment reporter, probably the last 18 or so. I want to say first that the job of an environment reporter, and any reporter really, is not to be an advocate. So I take that pretty seriously. And just as you would not expect the crime reporter to be a criminal or the police reporter to be pro-police, I try to walk straight down the middle and present things fairly, and to present the science as best as it's known and the truth of whatever matter is at hand. One of the things I love about reporting on the environment is sharing the beauty of nature and just the creatures that live around us in Savannah. Here's a great horned owl that I saw recently, and you'll see in this next clip that I shared it with a few of my friends in the neighborhood, and it gives me that same joy to share it with readers in the newspaper. And I think this love of nature forms a foundation for what a lot of people need to connect with other more challenging issues in the environment. Things like pollution and global warming and all of those more troublesome issues that
Hey, Grandma.
get at difficult topics. So we share it in the paper just like we share it in real life. And truth be told, I just love a good critter story. So this one is about an invasive lizard called a tegu. And you can find them in rural Georgia if you look hard enough, though we did not the day that I went with the researchers. They have the potential to overwinter here, so it seemed like a good idea to get the word out to people that this is an invasive that Georgia probably doesn't need, just like the invasive snakes in Florida. If we can nip it in the bud, then we have a chance. One of the challenging things about reporting on science is that, just like this tortoise I saw the other day out for a walk,
Was he little when you got him?
slowly. But reporting, by its very nature, is supposed to go quickly. So there's a disconnect there that's hard sometimes. Another thing to be careful about in reporting is that just like when I came across this copperhead on a trail the other day, you want to be careful to look at your subject from all sides. And sometimes that might make you nervous, and it's just necessary and you need to do it. So recently, as you may have heard, we are in the middle of a pandemic, and I haven't been always able to focus on environmental stories. Like here, I was tested for COVID-19 and made a story out of that, and I've done a lot of COVID-19 stories lately. Before the pandemic, I liked to write about what local people were doing for environmental projects. This is Sarah Ross, who has a beautiful heritage farm, basically, at Wormslow. She's one of the many people that I've profiled locally, and that's a real joy of the job, too. Another challenge of the job is trying to cover things like global warming, where they've been described as slow-moving disasters. It's just difficult to get your arms around it. It's everywhere, so it's nowhere. But recently, I teamed up with Emily Jones from GPB, and we've been doing a series about how sea level rise is affecting septic tanks and septic systems along the whole coast. Thanks so much for inviting me to participate. I really appreciate it. Take care.
I love Mary. She's lovely. Why did we show you that video? I should have probably introduced this before, but I'd like to go ahead and tie this back into the first part of our segment, which was news around the state. Mary is a perfect example of why we need more reporting on environmental issues in our own backyards. She put this together for us in probably about a day's time, but she quickly reminded us that she is the journalist and she wants to cover what is objective. So we really do appreciate the stories that Mary shares with us, her personal experiences that she also injected there. Honestly, like, we would not be as informed as we are today without her. So thank you, Mary. We really do appreciate it. So following our Georgia environmental news, and also Mary Landers as well, we'd like to recap the top environmental actions dedicated to the good, the bad, and the indecipherable environment-related goings-on in the Peach State. We like to call it win, lose, or draw. Joining us today in the studio is a fellow Dogwood volunteer, Georgia Enviro show co-producer, Yes, I'm not doing this all by myself. Resident wordsmith, Danny Ray. Let me see if I can pull her into the studio real quick, and let's engage. Danny, welcome to the show. How are you?
I'm well, thank you. How are you?
I'm doing just lovely. So the reason I wanted to bring you in today, I know that we have a segment that you're actually going to be hosting in just a moment called Win, Lose, or Draw. But I did want to kind of touch on one of our last news topics, which is actually a massive win for us on the legislation front as it relates to our environment, HB 857.
Yes.
Essentially, what that bill, just to kind of recap for everybody, HB 857 basically just outlawed, or banned, I should say, the burning of chemically treated lumber, aka railroad ties, and all the things that I listed out from being burned into electricity. Yes, electricity, which is ridiculous. But why I wanted to bring you in today is I just wanted to kind of, I guess, prime your conversation to kind of get your thoughts on that win there. What do you think about that? How does that kind of fare for the state of Georgia?
It's a big win. It's very exciting. I personally feel like it maybe could have happened a long time ago. But no, it's great. It's great that we're finally coming around to this truth. I really feel for the frontline communities who are still stuck breathing that air and air like it. And I think we need to do more, but it's a really good start.
Let's kind of ride this wave of, again, positivity and wins into your beloved segment, Win, Lose, or Draw. So let me go ahead and turn it on over to you and give us some more wins that keep us rolling here. What do you think?
Okay, so some more good news. We will call this a win. It seems that coal ash is finally getting a reckoning in Georgia. Currently, it's cheaper to dispose of toxic coal ash than it is to dump household trash in Georgia. And because it's more expensive to dump this toxic sludge in surrounding states, Georgia has become the region's preferred coal ash dumping ground, with more than 4.5 million tons of it in our landfills to date. SB 123, which passed in the final days of the legislative session, will increase the price of offloading coal ash and provide funds to local governments for cleaning up the mess it's made. So that's great. That's a win. Other bills related to the coal ash problem that passed the House are HB 929, which addresses the post-closure care of coal ash dumping grounds, and HB 93, which requires local governments and the public to be informed about the dewatering process in coal ash ponds. Senate Bill 384 sought to keep coal ash and landfills at a distance from Georgia Blackwater rivers originating in our coastal plain. It looks like these didn't get a final floor vote, unfortunately, so we'll have to keep an eye on how all of that plays out. So win, lose, draw. Here's our lose. The guys in government don't seem to get it that we are shooting ourselves in the foot when we cut down our trees. HB 777, a bill to amend the official code of Georgia relating to standards and requirements for construction of buildings to allow wood composites to be used in taller buildings, seems to be part of a continuing push to expand the use of wood products in construction and increasing and subsidizing the harvest of trees. So that's a little strange. Cutting down trees used to be considered sustainable and renewable and all of those things, but we don't live in that world anymore and we don't have that luxury. So unfortunately, the bill passed in the final days of the legislative session. So that's a lose. Our draw. A little bit of good news and a little bit of bad news. Just this spring, Twin Pine Minerals applied to the Army Corps of Engineers to set up shop right next door to the boundary of the Okefenokee Refuge, with estimates putting their multi-phase, multi-year project within 400 feet of the swamp. It could also impact nearly 500 acres of wetlands, which the EPA has said could cause permanent and unacceptable damage, contributing to fires, droughts, the draining of the water table, and the exacerbation of climate change. And you guys, the Okefenokee is special. It is the largest blackwater wetlands in North America and one of the world's largest intact freshwater ecosystems. This ancient bog in Southeast Georgia also generates millions of dollars each year for the local economy as a popular recreational destination. So, In advance of a virtual public hearing on May 13th about the fate of the Okefenokee, over 60,000 comments from around the world poured in. With a typical number of comments to trigger an environmental impact statement, or EIS, being 20,000, this was an incredible response and a big win. We've called it a draw, though, because we won't know what's going to happen until the Army Corps of Engineers, who are supposed to reject proposals that risk the long-term protection of our national treasures, either denies Twin Pines their permit or requires the generation of an EIS. So stay tuned for how that's going to shake out. In the meantime, though, call Governor Brian Kemp and ask him to take action to save the swamp and stop the mine. Please.
Danny, thank you so much for this update. We really appreciate it.
Thank you,
Now,
Colin.
absolutely. Yeah, so I don't want to jinx it, but it sounds like we're kind of making some progress on this. So definitely, Danny, please keep us updated as things kind of unfold. If anything changes because Kim's desk falls apart or something crazy, please do let us know. Or if his pen runs out of ink, who knows? But keep us up to date. We really do appreciate it.
Will do.
Next, we'll be speaking to the Georgia Enviro Show's own science guy from Valdosta State University, Professor Dr. Michael Knoll, in our segment called Biomass, Fact or Fiction. Dr. Knoll will be digging into the dirt on biomass. For the past 20 years, Dr. Knoll has taught geography at Valdosta State University and has dedicated himself to environmental advocacy, community activism. When you ask him though, and I did, he's going to tell you that he's a family man and is a teacher at his core. So, Dr. Knoll, just before I bring you in, welcome to the Georgia Enviro Show. We are so excited to have you today.
Good evening, Colin. How are you doing?
Can you hear us?
Yes, I can.
I am lovely. How are you this evening?
I'm doing great. We are in the middle of a thunderstorm, but it looks like we are doing fine, so we should not have any interruptions.
That sounds about right for about 6 p.m. On a Georgia summer. So hang in there. If we lose you, we'll definitely bring you back in. But just to kind of dive into our biomass fact or fiction segment here, you know, just to hear the industry tell it, biomass, which essentially is burning trees, is the hot new ticket and eco-friendly fuel. But being that you're the expert on this, what does science tell us about biomass?
I'll be happy to answer that question. First of all, it's curious that a 10,000-year-old technology is considered a hot new ticket in regard to energy production, but let's leave that aside for a minute. The problem here is that the biomass industry is incredibly nifty when it comes to trying to sell a product. A product they sell with shiny brochures, they sell with beautiful names like Blue Sky Biomass Georgia, for the name of a wood pellet plant, say near Adel, Georgia. And they basically present to the public with a number of myths, or more directly called lies, in regard to what biomass is really about. Let's break that down. First of all, you hear that claim that biomass is clean. It is absolutely not clean. It actually is dirtier than even coal-firing plants. As we found out back in 2010, 2011, when we were fighting a locally proposed biomass incinerator, when we looked at the data we received from the EPD here in Georgia and compared our biomass incinerator with a proposed coal plant in Sandersville, Georgia, we were shocked to see that we were producing, or would be producing, more particulate matter, more sulfur dioxide, more nitrogen oxide, more carbon dioxide. So biomass is absolutely not clean. It is dirty. Let's be straight about that. Second thing is, this is also very important in regard to the discussion on our global climate change crisis. Biomass incineration, or the use of biomass, is certainly not carbon neutral. To think that you can consider the burning of a tree a biological entity that has basically sequestered and stored carbon from the atmosphere for decades. As soon as you burn that tree, that carbon, or in the form of carbon dioxide, is directly emitted into the atmosphere. So it's everything but carbon neutral. The third lie, and this is also an important one, since this is something our public service commissions like to say, and the biomass industry in general, we are definitely not just using wood waste and forest residuals. If you just look at the comment you made earlier, when you are indeed shipping millions of tons of wood pellets from the southern part of the United States to Europe, it cannot possibly be done just with wood waste and forest residuals. So that's a lie. And that lie translates into basically cutting down of huge amounts of forests and trees, whole trees, not just little pieces of it. And then the fourth point, perhaps, this is very important also in regard to comment that I heard earlier, is that biomass is definitely not safe. When you look at the emissions and you talk to entities like the American Lung Association, the American Heart Association, you can see that there is a significant increase in cardiovascular diseases, in cancer rates, in respiratory illnesses. So it's not safe for those living nearby. So that's also something that needs to be clearly stated. And lastly, perhaps it is important to point out that this is a poor investment, because the biomass industry would literally not exist if it wasn't for tax subsidies. So we're subsidizing something that is, environmentally speaking, insane, that is threatening the health of our citizens, and that is just a bad idea. So for these 5 reasons, biomass energy is just a hoax, and it's something we should not have to deal with, honestly.
Interesting. So as I mentioned earlier, on the Climate Nexus polling done by Yale, people in the state of Georgia seem to be kind of coming around to the idea, which is sad to think, but needless to say, it's good that they are. But they're coming around to the idea that climate change is very real, so much so that they want to hold their elected officials accountable for this, be it on a federal or a local sort of level. But with that sort of, I guess, shift in kind of thought around the state, why do people seem to still think that biomass is a clean form of energy? What seems to be kind of the tipping point there for them?
It is on one hand the result of a successful campaign done by the biomass industry, which is unfortunately also supported by public service commissioners who are supposed to be serving their citizens and not these industries. And so you can easily hoodwink people into believing something to be clean when in fact it is dirty and it is dangerous. And so what people have to really do is look at the facts, do some research, or talk to folks like the Dogwood Alliance, or give me a call and I'll be happy to let them know the truth about biomass incineration, and then use that knowledge, because if you have indeed 2/3 of Georgians say, we must do something about global climate change, we must invest in renewable energies. Once you understand that biomass is neither clean, nor really the kind of renewable energy we want to support in the first place, then you have to translate that knowledge into action and vote those people out of office who do not support the wisdom of the scientists and the common wisdom now also embraced by the Georgians in general, that we must approach this differently. Global climate change is a real crisis, and we can no longer support, certainly not an expansion of the biomass industry.
Right, exactly. Certainly not, definitely not expanding. So you mentioned a little bit earlier and just kind of touched on that your actual community was actually directly impacted by the biomass community or biomass industry back in 2010. So right. What I guess in this next question is, what's happening in your backyard? What's happening in the Southeast US as it relates to biomass in the Southeast?
In general, the Southeast is basically a target for the biomass industry because the Southeast is considered a wood basket of the United States. And so we are, whether or not you're in Georgia or in the Carolinas and elsewhere in the Southeast, we are targets of an industry that sees basically trees that can be turned into biomass that is heavily subsidized and therefore profitable for them. And so we have firms like Enviro, for example, who are also taking over the wood pellet plant in Waycross, Georgia, for instance, who are very much tied into this global insanity of biomass incineration, where they literally, as you mentioned earlier, are shipping millions of tons of wood pellets to Europe so that they can almost brag about it even on their own website in regard to, say, the United Kingdom. In the UK, you have seen an increase by more than 400% of biomass energy production with the help of these wood pellets since the year 2012. And why is this happening? In Europe, you have, unfortunately, still sort of like this EU Renewable Energy Directive, which goes back to 2009, that had at that point supported, as we do still here in the United States, this idea of biomass energy being clean and renewable and carbon neutral, which is the most insane aspect of it from my point of view. But you have also had fairly recently, just last year, the European Academy's Advisory Council, which is a council made up of scientists across Europe, say, this is insane. We need to stop subsidizing a form of energy that is neither carbon neutral, nor safe, nor clean. And so I think the mood is changing in Europe, and we have to understand here in Georgia and elsewhere in the South that we are going down in the wrong direction with this. We must stop. We must actually see a decline in biomass production in that regard.
So one thing that it seems like fact is definitely on our side. Science is certainly on our side, but where are our elected officials on all of this? I know that I mentioned, obviously, again, going back to Nexus polling, it sounds like Georgia is changing their mind, which is great. But where are our elected officials on it right now? Why does there seem to be a discrepancy between science and their rationale of basically giving the green thumbs up to biomass in the state?
As they like to say, you just have to follow the money. And it doesn't matter if you're in Georgia or in Florida or elsewhere for that matter. Let me give you two examples. First, I'll start with Florida. You have, for example, in Florida, you had a former governor, Rick Scott, who was a shareholder in a Texas-based energy firm, and therefore he was very much in favor of the construction of Sabal Trail Pipeline, which runs from central Alabama to central Florida near Orlando, because he's benefiting from it. Now, his own state, which is the one that has the most to fear in terms of global climate change, of course, will not benefit from this, but this doesn't matter to Mr. Scott. Now, if you look at the public service commissioners in Georgia, people like Jason Shaw, for example, or Tim Echols and others, on one hand, they are in the same situation as Governor Scott is that some of them are actually landholders. They have themselves land with forest or wood mass on it they would like to monetize. So there's a clear conflict of interest. And for all practical purposes, shouldn't be even serving on the Service Commission because there's a conflict of interest. And so they are basically closing their eyes to the realities of what biomass energy production is about, because they can monetize their own trees. And they unfortunately are pushing this false narrative of biomass being renewable, clean, the sort of like energy form we want to support. But in the end, it's a horrible situation. And therefore, we must go and vote these guys out of office, period.
Absolutely. I cannot agree with you any more than that. So what it seems like, not only is this kind of like a political thing, not only is it kind of a fiscal thing, but it's also an environmental justice issue. Can you kind of just touch on that in a couple sentences by chance?
Absolutely. Particularly in the current context, it's important to realize there are so many different aspects of social, environmental, and racial injustices that exist really in our society. When it comes to biomass, the biomass industry in general, whether or not this is a biomass incinerator or a wood pellet plant, their preferred locations are typically poor rural communities which are desperate for either jobs or economic development. And many times these industries also end up in the neighborhood of minorities. Like this would have been the situation here in Valdosta if we were not able to stop this back in 2011, because the biomass incinerator they had proposed for our community would have been close to 2 elementary schools with predominantly African-American kids, as well as close to an African-American neighborhood. And so you have clearly environmental injustice, you should actually call it, or in racism in the regard of the location of these industries. That's also true for bus depots, train depots, and everything else. If you just look at the picture, we are supporting something that is not only environmentally and economically speaking unacceptable, it's also unacceptable when it comes to the racism that's contained in these kinds of actions and developments.
Right, exactly. You know, this is more than just a financial issue. This is going to, environmental crises affect the minorities of the world disproportionately. So I guess it's obviously going to hurt them a lot more. So one thing I kind of wanted to, I think we have about a minute and a half left here, but what I want to ask you about is, I sent you a link a little bit earlier this morning. I apologize for sending that so kind of ad hoc, but I mentioned it earlier, but it's basically hot off the presses. But to the point on the climate nexus polling, it sounds almost too good to be true that not just Georgia, but the most of the, I guess, informed United States is coming around to the idea of climate change being a reality and that we need to act to it. And that connection is super important. We need to act on it. And one act could be voting, for example. So what do you think? Do you think this is too good to be true, that the climate nexus polling is like, is it wrong? Or what do you think? Is this exciting? How should we feel?
It's on target. Now the challenge will be for us to make sure that the 2/3 of Georgians who believe that we must do something about what our government does, what the public servants commissioners do, is to translate into action in regard to voting, for instance. So when November elections come up, or every single year, you go and you vote for those who understand the seriousness of our situation. You also vote every time you go shopping. Do you really want to buy certain items? You certainly want to stay away from single-use plastics, for example. And so there are lots of things you can do. You can be engaged in your communities, work on a city council, challenge the city council, run for office on perhaps the county commission, or challenge the county commission. And then you also should embrace, and this is my last example, what I call the 4 R's. So reduce, reuse, and recycle, everyone knows, but refuse is an important, the 4th R, refuse to participate in something you know is wrong. Single-use plastics, it's wrong. There's certain kind of like shopping for low efficiency gears, equipment, cars, all of these things. If we know better, we just have to translate our knowledge into action in whatever form or shape we can, and we can turn this around. Because, last thing, the Dalai Lama once said, if you believe you're too small to make a difference, try sleeping with a mosquito. Every mosquito, every human being has a voice. Let's use that power.
That's excellent. And I've heard that quote before, and I don't think, actually I had a mosquito fly into my ear a little bit earlier, and I almost went crazy. So that's excellent. Thank you for those words of wisdom. So Dr. Knoll, thank you so much for joining us here on our first episode of the Georgia Enviro Show, sharing your expert insights on the dirty truth that is biomass. We really do appreciate it. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks for having me, Colin.
For our next segment, we'll be hearing from a Georgia activist who gives their time, their talents, their skills, their blood, sweating, tears, you name it. They even get a splinter for us if we ask them to. But in support, ultimately, of a greener future. In our next segment, I like to call this next one our Climate Warriors segment. Joining us today is actually one of our favorite volunteers. She's a longtime environmental champion. She's our, as I just said, climate warrior, a tenured Stanford Forest volunteer, Stanford Forest on my shirt here, and just an all-around awesome human. Her name is Chelsea Corbin. Chelsea, welcome to the show. How are you?
Hey, Colin. It's really good to see you.
You as well. So, Chelsea, I guess I do understand that we have 2 things going on in this segment right now. I know you have a couple words to share, but I think first, we have a video that we'd like to share with you. Do you mind if we go ahead and share that?
That'd be great. Thank you.
I joined up with Stanford Forest after I met a local field organizer at a Rise for Climate rally. So this was a really great opportunity to learn some new skills. I've learned a lot about community organizing and petitioning and putting together compelling events to help people see the issue and learn what they can do to make a difference. It's really inspiring to be part of a group that's working toward a common goal that we can all get behind. I feel very motivated by the other people that I've met through this process and talking to people about why they care about nature and feel like we're in on something together. My name is Chelsea Corbin and I stand for forests.
I love that video. I hope everybody else loves that video. But Chelsea, thank you for being, like I said, an awesome human. Thank you for being here this evening. But if you could, I think the whole reason that you wanted to be here tonight is to tell us, like, why environmentalism for you? What does that do for you? What does that mean to the world for you?
Yeah, absolutely. I really appreciate the opportunity to join you today and build on the idea from the video that nature brings us all together. You know, we're animals, and that means that we are part of Earth's interrelated systems that link us to and through nature. And that's why I'm so passionate about environmental issues. They relate to everything else that I care about. When I'm fighting for climate justice, I'm also fighting for racial justice, for economic justice, for women's rights, even public health. It's pretty astonishing to draw the line from climate change, population growth, and deforestation to the way that habitat loss pushes people and animals in closer proximity, increases our risk of exposure to diseases. And here we are 6 months into a global pandemic with rates of infection still on the rise in the United States. Even when it's not at first obvious, it seems that environmental issues can be found at the root of most of our world's problems. And I think that's really important because that means that nature is central to the solutions as well. I find hope in that because it means our cause is universal. The environment is the thread that you can weave through any other priority. And I'm so excited to see the emergence of intersectional environmentalism thanks to the youth activists who are guiding our movement today. I've been an environmentalist since I was a kid, and it feels like we're experiencing a transformation of our movement, where youth environmental activists who may have different color skin or different family makeups or speak different languages, we're finding each other and we're joining together to fight for change. Now is the time to achieve climate justice. And in doing so, we can advance equity across multiple components of our society. I personally worked toward that vision by supporting candidates who believe in our ability to combat climate change and calling on elected officials to reallocate resources from police budgets to efforts that dismantle environmental racism. I talk to my family, my peers, and my community about environmental issues because we know just getting people to talk about this stuff is the first step on the journey to justice. And of course, I volunteer with Dogwood Alliance's Stand for Forest campaign to halt biomass in the Southeast. When we work together, we win. And I hope to connect with everyone on the call tonight to fight for that intersectional climate justice that will protect the planet and its people. I know there's a lot to worry about in the world right now, and I love that ours is a movement of hope, of ambition, and so importantly, of inclusivity. Change is possible when we work together. Thanks for letting me talk to everyone today.
Of course, please talk more if you don't mind. That'd be lovely. So Chelsea, I do have a couple questions for you following up on that. So, and I apologize if these kind of like are surprise, but they're definitely good. So I understand you're a huge Wendell-Berry fan. I do believe Michael also shares the same affinity as well. And I too share the same. But what I wanted to ask you is like, what does his work mean to you in the context of like Stand for Forest and your passion for environmentalism? Like why Wendell-Berry, I guess is the question.
Yeah, well, I think I do have a little bit of a soft spot for him because he's also from Kentucky. And so he was one of the first environmentalists that I was aware of. So I've been reading his work since I was in high school, and it was just really transformative for me in terms of kind of seeing how nature matters so much to people and why it's so important to care for it gently. I mean, he's a farmer. He works the land. You know, people might dispute agriculture's impact on nature as just as a general premise, but Wendell-Berry approaches his farming in a way that's regenerative, that's about his reliance on the earth and respecting that. And specifically and related to Stand for Forest, I know we've talked about the poem, The Peace of Wild Things, which I would guess is probably his best known work. Another poem of his that I really love is called Planting Trees. And it's just this really kind of patient description of the magnificence of trees as they're planted and grow and change the world, literally change the world just by being. And so that's, stuck with me for years and a huge part of why I think it's really important to stand for forests.
That's excellent. And I'm glad that you have such a lovely foundation of like why you do something. It's not just because it's a topical thing, because it means a lot to you. And that's impressive. Absolutely. I do want to ask you one last follow-up question.
Sure.
And I feel like you might know it's coming up, but little Chelsea, what would she think of grown-up Chelsea today, just given like your whole journey through environmentalism? Like, what would she say to you?
Yeah, that's an interesting question because I have cared about this for so long. And so I don't think little Chelsea would be surprised by the continued commitment and passion around environmental issues. and climate justice. But I think she would be shocked to see me doing stuff like this, because little Chelsea was incredibly shy. And so, you know, if I could flip the question and go back in time and talk to myself about how to move through the world in a meaningful way, I would say, don't be afraid to use your voice, because we all have to speak out about what we care about if we expect to see things change.
That's excellent. Sorry if it was too personal a question, but just had to know.
Yeah, thanks for asking.
Chelsea, thank you again so much for being here today. We really do appreciate you. Your passion for the work is obvious. It's inspiring. We're lucky to have you as a teammate on the Enviro show. Thank you so much. We really do appreciate you.
Thank you, Colin. Back at you.
For our next segment, we'll be taking a look at the next generation of environmental activists with our segment we like to call Forest Trek, a Next Generation. And to do that, I wanted to bring back in someone we spoke to a little bit earlier, Danny Ray, who actually hosted our Win, Lose, or Draw segment. So let's bring her back into the conversation. There's something special I want to ask her. So Danny, welcome back.
Thank you.
I know that during the whole show production, you've played multiple roles for Stanford Forest, as multiple roles for producing the show. You're a Stanford Forest volunteer. You're a partner to your husband, Michael. You're a mom. As we head into the Forest Trek segment, I just wanted to kind of get your thoughts on, like, how does that relate to your family? You know, Forest Trek is all about how do we inspire the next generation of environmental activists? So let me just go ahead and just ask you plainly, how has being an environmental activist like worked its way into your family life? You know, like, what is it kind of, I guess, meant to you? And if you could paint us a picture of, like, what is it like as an environmentalist with your family?
Gosh. So I've been an environmentalist at heart for a really long time. I was kind of giggling while listening to what Chelsea was saying. But I was afraid sort of to speak up or advocate for my position. And then I had kids, and I realized that when I advocate for myself, I'm advocating for them. What's best for me is what's best for them. And I suddenly didn't have that fear anymore. So that's been a big change for me. But in terms of family life and how environmentalism affects it, I really feel like it's important to level with your kids. Mine are small. One of them does not get it at all. He doesn't get anything. So, I mean, there's no talking to an almost 3-year-old about that kind of stuff. But, you know, we're always talking about speaking truth to power, which I feel is crucial. It's really important. But you also need to speak truth to your kids. I mean, don't scare them, obviously. But kids need to know where their food comes from, where their meat comes from. You know, get it closer to the center, you can get the whole thing. When a bug comes into the house, you know, the bug is in our house, you know, and it's like we just immediately want to on the bug, but it's like we need to stop and think about here we are on Mother Earth, just reaping all of these wonderful, amazing benefits, and we need to be appreciative of it and sort of respect her back. What she gives us.
There's a lot of ways. That's excellent. You know, I wish I would have been taught more about not killing bugs when I was a child, because now I definitely feel that sadness you're talking about. It hurts.
Well, everyone gets mad at me when I say that we try to be kind of Buddhist in our approach. It's a lot of eye rolling, but
so actually, important. You know, what's funny is, like, so I do have 2 questions for you. This last one, actually, I don't know how you did it, but you read my mind. So basically, like, what lessons do you hope that your children kind of carry into their adult years? You know, it sounds like you want them to be more patient with their environment around them, but, like, ultimately, like, what do you hope from these, like, little micro lessons that you would teach to a 3-year-old? You know, like, what do you hope that kind of translates as they're older?
This could be a really long answer. In terms of humanity, I really believe in the equal worth of all human beings. Just in terms of worth and dignity, everyone is equal, and so we should be respecting each other far more than we do. And I feel the same way sort of about everything else around us. You know, that I want my kids to know that we should be that we should be treading lightly, that we should be respecting and appreciating things. Unfortunately, I think my children, who are almost 5 and 3, they're going to grow up in a world where they're quite aware of what we have done, and the bed we've made, and now we're sleeping in it. The kids are going to have a very different experience with the planet than we've been lucky to have. Mostly lucky.
Right.
So
like one thing we have about 10 seconds left for this segment, but it was to say, like, I thought the reason we want to bring you back in is obviously like give you a very special perspective on this. Like, what does it mean, like, as a parent, to bring the next generation up with these sorts of like environmental sort of like, I guess, missions, and like, I guess just how they feel about it, like, I think that's such a lovely sort of take on it. And I really appreciate you being able to kind of on the fly kind of share us like a little insight into your family and your little family of activists, I guess you could say.
Sure. Thank you.
Excellent. Thanks, Danny. Really appreciate you being here.
Thanks, Colin.
So as I mentioned, folks, Forest Trek, the Next Generation, is an initiative obviously started by the Dogwood Alliance to empower our next generation of environmental activists. And recently I read an article by The Guardian, and what it was kind of talking about is, amazingly, kids all over the world are educating and empowering themselves with very little help from us, as parents or our guardians or anything like that. What the next generation, I guess, is being called by The Guardian is the Generation Greta. So Greta Thunberg, the environmentalist. Children around the globe are facing mudslides, food insecurity, severe weather, endless fires, plastic problems, and more. You name it, environmental problems are going to manifest themselves. These kids, in most cases, who are years from being able to vote, are reading and writing on the wall, or reading the writing on the wall, and engaging in the fight to pull the planet back from the brink. So to round out this segment, I wanted to, 2 volunteers actually submitted clips for our next generation. And I wanted to show you kind of like these little activists at work.
Jay's tree. When Jay was born, his parents planted a tiny tree outside his bedroom window. The tree and Jay grew tall and strong side by side. Of course, the tree grew much taller and stronger. Jay loved his tree. Every morning he watched the birds gather on branches, and he listened to them sing as they greeted the day. In the spring, birds often built nests at the top of his tree, and Jay would watch the baby birds grow, protected by his tree. When Jay leaned out his window and got very close to the branches and leaves of his tree, he sometimes saw a caterpillar munching on a leaf. He liked watching the caterpillar. He knew it was getting ready for a long sleep before it turned into a butterfly. On hot summer afternoons, Jay loved to sit in the shade under his tree and watch Mimi, his cat, climb the tree and use its trunk to sharpen her claws. Often, Jay used the tree to hide behind when he and his friends played hide and seek. Every Saturday, Jay watered his tree so that its branches would stay strong and leaves would stay green. And Jay always liked to just look at his tree. It was a very pretty tree. One day, Jay's father, who knew how much Jay loved his tree, said to Jay, "How would you like a tree house in your tree?" "A tree house," Jay explained. "I'd love to have a house in my tree." "Then come on," said Jay's dad. "Let's go to the lumber yard and get the wood to build your tree house." At the lumber yard, everywhere Jay looked, there was wood, light-colored wood, and dark-colored wood, rough wood and smooth wood, little pieces of wood and big pieces of wood. "Wow," said Jay, "where did all this wood come from?" Mr. Stevens, who was sitting up on his forklift, heard Jay and called down, "From trees. It all comes from trees." "From trees," Jay repeated, looking up at Mr. Stevens. "You mean we cut down trees to get wood?" "Yes," replied Mr. Stevens. "Some trees are grown just so we can use their wood." "But what do we use all this wood for?" Jay asked, looking at the stacks of wood. "The wood from trees is used for many things," Mr. Stevens answered, climbing down from his forklift. "We use wood to make tables and chairs and bookcases and other furniture. Look out on the street. Those telephone poles and power poles are made of wood, and we use a lot of wood for houses." treehouse, exclaimed Jay. That's right, Mr. Stevens. Gee, Jay sighed, sitting down on a stack of wood. I never knew we used so much wood. It must take a lot of trees. Yes, it does.
So what I just want to pull out of that first video right there is a mother and daughter communing over, learning about the environment. I do have a second video here, which is probably one of the cutest things I've ever seen in my entire life. But let me cut to the next one and let me show you what I mean.
So Sabria, what kind of tree is that?
Peach tree.
Yes, that is a peach tree. So what happens? How do you think peaches are gonna grow?
You have to water and you put it in dirt.
Yep, you have to put it in dirt and water it, and then after the leaves grow, then you're gonna have flowers grow on it, and then after the flowers grow on it, then you're gonna have peaches. Are you ready to eat a peach?
Yeah.
Let me see your peach smile. Yay.
Hello.
So Sabria,
Raspberry.
what do we have over here? What kind of berries?
Raspberry.
Raspberries. What else?
Berry.
Blackberries. All right. So what's that tree back here? Right here.
Orange tree.
That's right. That's an orange tree. Then we got a pear tree. And what about this one?
Fig tree.
The fig tree. Yep. What? See the figs growing? Oh, there's one in there. What? Use your words so I can hear you.
Little red dot.
Oh yeah, the leaves are turning, get little spots on them. So out of all of these fruits, which one is your favorite? The figs. All right, don't pick it yet. It's not ready. All right, guys, that's Georgia Sabria time.
Can I get these?
All right, bye.
A lot of fish.
Well, we have squash, okra, bell pepper, mint, parsley.
And don't forget about the tomatoes.
Yeah, sweet potatoes. And then we have some tomatoes, some squash, zucchini. And what are these things right here?
Carrot.
That's corn. Yep, corn. All right, so what's your favorite vegetable? Oh, and that has a plum seed in it. What's your favorite vegetable? That's corn, too. Which one do you like to grow the most? The peaches? All right.
That is probably the cutest thing I've ever seen. I love that the father and his daughter are just out there in the garden communing, you know, like little kids are just the coolest. So enough about that. Following these nuggets of wholesomeness, I wanted to engage the audience for just a moment and share some special thoughts. This one goes out to all the parents, the grandparents, the aunts, uncles, brothers, sisters watching us tonight. Thank you. Seriously, thank you. My biggest hope following this evening is that you all take what you've learned here this evening and continue to teach your family and your kids and your neighbors, and especially your little ones, what it means to take care of our planet. So as we kind of begin to wind down our show this evening, I don't know about you, but I find all of this incredibly inspiring. Like, why else would we want to make a show about it? So now that you are up to speed on some of Georgia's biggest environmental stories, we invite you to join our team and become part of the solution. By joining the Stand for Forest team, you'll know when major issues come up. You'll have the tools to do something about it. I'll give you a quick tip. This is a tool about doing something about it, this entire show. So what I'd like to do is just take a quick pause right now and bring up some important information for everybody. And I'm not going to let you go until you hear me out. So what we have here on the screen is our Stand for Forest link to our pledge. Now, I bet this is really hard to type into your phone, and you're probably not going to do that right now, which is totally okay. But just remember, I got you here. So if you'd like, we also have this nifty QR code right up here. And if you go ahead and just take your phone and you scan that part of the phone, it will go right online and will bring up our Stand for Forest pledge. So what I'll go ahead and do is I'll just take a couple seconds here to just wait for everybody. If you want to go and chime in the comments up here, I'll take a peek there. But please just take 3 seconds, take a picture, or scan that QR code, and make a pledge to stand for forests. Stand for forests is to save the forests in our neighborhoods, in our state, north of us. If you like camping, signing this will help to save those forests. So let me go ahead and just wait for a second. See if anybody's commenting on this. Oh, thank you, Dogwood Alliance, for sharing that. Aw, there's a lot of big fans out there. These comments are really kind. So, by the way, for the first 10 climate warriors, as we're going to call you after you sign our pledge, the first 10 climate warriors will receive, drum roll please, a lovely Stand for Forest t-shirt, which I'm currently wearing right now, and also adorns my wall here. Yes, this is here every single day. But if you do sign up, first 10, we'll get a lovely t-shirt. I'll send that out to you. You don't have to pay a penny, but we'll take care of you. Also, we'll be sending a follow-up email to this broadcast to make sure that you have all the information you need. But to wrap everything up here, folks, thank you all for joining us here tonight. Thank you for the Dogwood Alliance for producing this show, our partners for standing by us and participating in this experiment. This is an experiment. I don't know how many other Georgia environment shows that broadcast live on Facebook in the middle of a pandemic exist today, but I think we're the only one, FYI. And to, of course, our volunteers who work to pull this all together. Be sure to tune in next time for our next episode with the Georgia Enviro Show, streaming live next Wednesday, July 8th. Put it on your calendar right now. I'm not going to wait for you guys to do that right now, but July 8th at 5:30. Next time, of course, bring a friend. Episode 2 will be hosted by the Sierra Club. Sierra Club Georgia chapter staff and volunteer will cover their current work on their work to protect the Okefenokee Swamp. I see over in the comments that there are a lot of Okefenokee fans. I too am one of them, so go Okefenokee. But from Atlanta to Savannah, from the Smokies to the Okefenokee, join us here again next week, June 8th at 5:30 Eastern Time via Facebook Live. Thanks, everybody.